Friday. Today is Tuesday, March 15th, and today I want to talk about how we define some of the terms that I'm going to be using going forward, and how we define some of the spaces that we're going to be talking about going forward. So, today might be a little bit boring, but this is kind of some of the bread and butter of what I geek out about when it comes to designing in a late stage successional forest or woodlot or anything that is approaching its apex successional community. So if that sounds interesting, I hope you'll stick around. And if not, I hope you'll stick around and get interested. We are currently standing on the southern edge of our downhill pond. And if I were to pan skyward, you might say that we are in a clearing in the canopy. But Dave Jackie and Eric Tonesmeyer argue and write that the terms clearing, gap, and glade all have specific definitions. And these are each represented as a function of your tree's height and the distance over ground that is free of canopy. So what that means is, for a given height of our canopy trees, I would tell you from experience that these are between 60 and 80 feet tall. Some of them might be 90-ish feet tall. So I would say that my height, or my value h, is 80. In order for it to be a gap in the forest, I would need to have a canopy-free area equal to 1 to 2 heights of the tree. So anything that is a round-ish space in your forest that has a minimum of 1 height's worth of your tree as its diameter, and that is a gap. A clearing is anything 2 to 4 times the height of your canopy. And a glade is any space or break in your canopy higher than 4 times the height of your canopy. So if we are going to carry the idea that our average height of canopy is represented by h, a gap would be 1 to 2h, a clearing would be 2 to 4h, a glade would be 4 and up. So in our woodlot, we do not really have anything more than a small gap. Ponds and lakes are almost automatically gaps, but they may be clearings depending on the circumference of your pond or lake or water structure, whatever body of water you have. And we can use this kind of terminology and concept to define our spaces in the woods. The size of the break and canopy has a direct let's say impact on the amount of sun hours that a given space gets to the poleward side of the break in the canopy. That would mean, if you were in the northern hemisphere like we are, that would be northward. So if I wanted to provide more sunlight to the area at the base of this pine tree where the log has fallen, I would begin thinning towards the south, but kind of in a trapezoidal way. So one way off this way, one way off that way, and a wider swath of clearing than what is behind me. That'll create a sun trap or a bowl effect, and it'll concentrate the sun at the poleward-most area. And the closer your tree line is, the fewer sun hours and the slighter the angle of sun available. When we're dealing with outside areas, it can be helpful to break up our designs in our minds. You don't take bites that are too big. You gotta break things into smaller pieces so you can kind of chew on them and then be easier to digest. And when we're performing mental tasks, I think that the same is true. So, to that end, you may be familiar with the concept of an outdoor living room. This idea that there are spaces, maybe in the front or the back of your main dwelling, where you travel the most and you have specific desires for the view or an activity that you can perform in that space, whether it's entertaining or small vegetables or an herb garden. Maybe it's the barbecue pit, and that's like an outdoor kitchen, living room, dining room space, right? We're going to expand on that, and the concept of a room outdoors is any space defined by a change in habitat, character, speciation, or form. We can break these apart by creating artificial walls, intraversable paths, thickets, bushes, and hedges. So, as we're walking through, you would say that this might be equivalent to a hallway in a house. And what are the characteristics of this hallway? We have a natural pathway created by canopy trees of large diameter. There is a very gentle sloping transition from the high point of the property towards the low point of the property. And we have multiple branching paths available. So I would call this a main pathway or a main artery in our design, right? You can come up from the southern edge of the yard down this path, or you could break to the right at the entrance of it. You could get down to this point, and you could start heading towards the lowest parts of the property where the brook is and past, or you could continue on towards the pond or towards where the elders are, or. So these pathways or hallways, we've defined in another step of our food forest design process, but it's important to visually and characteristically distinguish them from the non-walking areas. Any foot traffic is going to be a source of compaction for your soil and will drive some of the porosity and airspace out. And since food forests, by their nature, are less actively tended to in maturity than, say, an annual garden would be, we need to make sure that we're conserving our energy when it comes to maintaining structures in our soil. So having a clearly delineated path, set of paths, and continuing that character through your design is worthwhile for any times that you have guests or visitors. And it also means that your design will be able to be read in all of the seasons that your area may experience. This space was up until recently covered in snow, but you could still make out the pathways and what are going to be the growing spaces just by virtue of a difference in height and the way that the snow drifted because of those structures. We are currently at the base of the hill leading up to the house. You can see at the moment there are no stairs here. To my left is one of the paths that leads up and to the space between the chicken and duck yards, and further off to the side that way is the main path up to the southern face of the property. Where we are right now is what I'm calling the main staircase entryway, or the foyer, and we're going to talk about how I think about these spaces, and hopefully give you guys a way to design and conceptualize how to break apart different areas of your property and woodlot. Alright, so you can see here a set of my notes. I did rewrite this for legibility, so I hope that you can read this alright. You can see here I've got my area and then space characteristics. So it is a transitional space. We go very quickly from the field up top to a very tall canopy space. It is the main entrance to the woodlot for foot traffic. We have a large diameter overstory and a very sparse understory. There are very few medium-sized shrubs. It's mostly ferns and barely any ephemerals. And so I've also noted here that my diameter to height is less than 1, so there are very few, if any, technical gaps in the canopy. There is a 40-foot elevation change between the field to the tall canopy, and it's roughly level again, so it does have some of that fertile valley water catchment area behavior to it. So we do have a higher loam percentage than the field, which is much more sandy, and it is generally wetter down here than up in the field. Below here, I have some of the functions that I'm looking to get out of this space and ways that we can use it so that I can organize and collect my design intentions more holistically. So this space, due to its existence as the main entrance to the woodlot for foot traffic, should introduce our food forest layout, how to differentiate between our paths and our growing spaces, and how to navigate the space. It should serve as a space for materials collection so that when I'm doing projects back here, I can very easily stack up wood or rocks or compost, things of that nature here for dispersal into the food forest itself. And it acts as a pathway node, and a node would be any space along your pathways that intersects as another avenue for other pathways. So to make a little bit more sense of that, I have a small gathering space. A group of people could reasonably stand here and discuss which direction they were going to go next. There is 1, 2, 3, 4 pathways out of this space. And if you were to walk any of these other pathways, you'll come to another spot. So we'll come over here, and look, there's another internode. We can continue off in one direction, or we can cut back and go a second direction. And here's our third direction, and actually a branching, almost like an artery, or the way that a river would have a cutback or a windback. And these methods of creating pathways provide you with various microclimates and different spaces. And you could break these apart by having, a hedge that is hip high, waist high, something that you can see over. That's really just a physical barrier, but not a visual barrier. Or you can completely differentiate spaces by having a taller, denser visual barrier in a method that is similar to the way, say, like a Japanese garden would be, where there are hidden compartments even in a small space, and it's achieved just by creating blind spots. So as we move forward with this project, I am hoping to show you guys some really crazy, awesome ways to organize spaces. I know that got a little hairy and a little long-winded, but if you stuck around, I appreciate you. If you've got a friend who couldn't make it, just let them know I appreciate them too. As always, thanks for watching, and happy planning.